Good morning. How are you? Cut the mic off. I meant to cut the bell off. A beautiful day. No, I'm serious. I love weather like that. Yeah. Great weather. Get to get out and enjoy nature.
Anywhere you want.
So, next week, I've had some, not what I would call pushback, but questions about some of what I'm teaching, and therefore what does it mean about having a personal relationship with sacred mystery or Jesus, or however you think about that. And also, several people are asking, in light of what's going on in our culture, what does spirituality, the kind of spirituality that I'm teaching, have to do with that? So next week I want to speak to that specifically. It'll be a continuation of this business of how we think about the sacred in the gap between what no longer works and what hasn't been put in place yet. And in particular, how do you pray in the gap? You might be interested to know that Jim Wallace, who is the one of the leading spokespeople for Christian activism in the United States right now, says that the answer to gun violence in our culture is prayer. It's an interesting thing. This guy is very interesting. And also, in the online Buddhist journal, the Lion's Roar that I take, they say that what would be the Buddhist, what would be analogous in Buddhism to prayer, about how we contemplate on anger, greed, and hate have a lot to do with how we deal with what's going on in our culture. So I'll be talking about that next week. Don't miss it, if you can. If you can miss it, miss it. So, no matter who you are, no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. I absolutely love listening to a program on the radio called Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. I don't usually listen to it live, but I record the podcast, and just the intro of the announcer who says, you know, from NPR and WBZ in Chicago, it's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and then they go, oh, and I smile every time I hear that introduction. I usually listen to it when I'm either working out, or it's perfectly timed for a 45 or 50-minute workout. I listen to it when I'm cooking, sous chefing. Drives my wife crazy because I put on wireless headphones, and she says she has a difficult time getting my attention. I don't know why that is. I laugh during listening to that show from first to last. And the format is consistently the same. I like that predictability. And when Wait, Wait was here in Houston a few years ago, it was so popular, they had to schedule a second night. Did you all go to that? ZZ Top with, it's who? Whoever it was Not My Job. That was the segment that they were on. And I particularly like it when Paula Poundstone is on. So the show is set up to have people call in, and as the host puts it, to have people answer questions from this week's news. And there are three panelists, and they banter back and forth among themselves and with each other. And when the host, Peter Sagal, welcomes a caller, he consistently asks the same two questions. Where are you calling from? And what do you do there in wherever you are? And I want to say that from the spiritual perspective that we are trying to achieve in here, in these times together, these are among the most important questions to get right. Where are you from? And what do you do? I think all truly profound spiritual questions look simple, but they are difficult to answer, and their answers are ever evolving. The really holy people that I have known in my life, either in person or through their writings about them or the writings they themselves have done, are consistently clear about these two questions, which could be stated in another way. They are questions of identity, who are you, and the question of purpose, what do you do? And I think that it is sufficiently clear, at least at the collective level, that we are not very good at answering these questions. In my talking about living in the gap between the no longer and the not yet, I'm referring to how an older order of believing and behaving is no longer not working for us, but also it's being destructive to us. I have, as the saying goes, been attending church all of my life. And I have heard, as perhaps you have, countless sermons on the story of Abraham almost sacrificing his son Isaac. This is Rembrandt's famous painting of that story. It's a great story. It's a dramatic story. It did not happen, but it's a great parable. It's a story that is designed to tell of an advance in the Israelites' understanding of God, and that their God did not demand, as the gods of the tribes around them, human sacrifice. And so we have even gotten to where we can make fun of that. The caption of this is the guy's about to be sacrificed saying, look, it's not personal, it's religious. So while we were in church this past Sunday and still trying to process yet another school shooting, it occurred to me that we willingly allow the sacrifice of children and of others for ideas and causes that we deem more important. There are a lot of countries that own guns, like Switzerland, where this kind of mass shooting does not occur. Every country has its share of mentally disturbed people, but no country beats ours in the number of people killed by guns every single day. And it seems to be a sacrifice that we are willing to make. And of course, just like any addict who uses, we can come up with all sorts of explanations and reasons, read excuses, as to why this is so, and either nothing can be done or should be done to change the situation. This is not a class about that, except very indirectly. I mentioned to you before the book of Joy. I read this book from cover to cover in one sitting. Wow. Now, it was an unusual sitting. It was on an airplane from Rome to Houston. The book is a series of reportings on conversations that occurred between the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu over a week-long period of time. Now, you likely know the history of these two now over 80-year-old people. The Dalai Lama has been exiled from his homeland for over 50 years, and Desmond Tutu lived through apartheid in South Africa and then led in the Truth and Reconciliation movement in that country. And they each, in their own way, say that no dark fate determines our future. We do. Each day and every moment, we are able to create and recreate our lives and the very quality of human life on this planet. That is the power that we have. Now, we can't, however, create that future using the same kind of belief system that got us here. And I'm not here to review this book. You should read this book. It's very useful, and if you are one of those who, probably only 2 or 3 of you have not yet done this, not yet taken up a daily spiritual practice. But if you're one of those, this book is filled with exercises that you can put in place that will help you along the way in that. Just one of the many valuable gems that I got from reading this book was a reaffirmation of my own conviction that what we need to address the situation of the world is education. And I'm not talking about education about reading and math, although those are very important. I am talking about an education that leads to our seeing and embracing that we all came from the same place and we are all charged with the same task. The best of all great religions teach this. Treat others as we ourselves would like to be treated. Now, ours is a violent culture, and there are people out there who argue that the human animal, in its desire for security and control, has always had a tendency to be violent, and it's innate with us. And there is, to a certain degree, a truth in that. Every one of you, I think, can identify with this. You mess with one of my kids or one of my grandkids, we know what that kind of energy feels like. Sometimes we mistake that kind of energy for if you cut me off on a freeway, but actually what the sciences say is that what is unique, innate within us, and absolutely essential for our survival is the ability to be empathetic and to cooperate with each other. And if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be here. But that's another topic for another time. I'm talking about something else. I'm talking about the mentality that got this country started, that allowed people to think that Native Americans who lived here before us were unworthy of having land that belonged to them. In case you can't read that, January 2021, President Standing Bear signs an executive order to deport all Caucasians to Europe. But the mentality was that the Native Americans who lived here were not worthy of being dealt with as equal. This was not their land. And our country was born out of that kind of mentality, that mentality that led us to fight one of the most deadly wars ever over the issue of owning people. That mentality had long been taught to our ancestors, growing out of the tribal religion of the Hebrews, fueled by the belief gone wrong in the Christian movement in the 4th century, that explicitly taught that if you didn't believe as we did, if you didn't belong to our group, we had the right to kill you. In the name of Jesus. So that righteous divisiveness became part of the collective DNA. Now, I think we have to explore this history if we're going to point to a different kind of future. Heaven and hell, topics that we will get to, are nothing more than the belief that God thinks and behaves like we do. Religion almost always creates God in the image of the human and then tries to force all reality into that frame of reference. This is one reason no religious system is eternal, and paradoxically, it is one reason changing a religious system is so difficult. By the way, political systems are religions as well. So the death of these systems, religious, political, is never easy. And the death of the fear that a system is dying, that stirs up a lot in people. And this is exactly what fundamentalism is about. A killing hostility directed toward that which or those who seek to call it into question. I think one of the things that has to be confronted in inhabiting the gap between the no longer and the not yet is fundamentalism. I've talked about the origin of what we know as Christian fundamentalism, which has morphed into a political movement called evangelical Christianity. Evangelical Christianity is not to have that particular label. That was brought to mind this week by the death of Billy Graham, who was an evangelical Christian who spoke to a different kind of social construct. I remember when Billy Graham came to Nashville, Tennessee, I was living in Columbia. He refused to hold a crusade in Nashville unless it was integrated. And believe me, in the 50s, that was advanced in Tennessee. But that was evangelical Christianity then. It's quite different today. Rigidity and righteousness about religious beliefs have probably been part of the human animal from the beginning. But in our time, and this is one of the things that's creating the gap in which we live, is that there is a massive, and what historian Martin Marty calls a convulsive ingathering of peoples into their separateness and over-againstness. And their goal is to protect their pride and power and place for others who are, of course, are busy doing the same thing back to them. And the name of the game is, we're virtuous and you're not. We're the good, you're the bad. I've got the truth and you don't. And I don't mean to come across that way. Fundamentalism arises when a group or an individual feels threatened. And the key word in understanding fundamentalism is reactivity. And this is, by the way, not in my notes. It's one of the reasons that I added to peace, love, and joy, patience. Because patience in my language is the same as being non-reactive, being non-judgmental. Just to take a breath and just to see, just to sit back and watch and see what happens. The movement that gave Christianity the title of fundamentalism that arose in the late 19th century, and whatever else it is not that old-time religion. It was invented in the modern world of the 1840s, and indeed back then, from 1850 until 1930 some odd, somewhere around then, the battle was framed that way. It was framed as the battle between the modernist and the fundamentalist. I also thought recently about the incredible paradoxical nature of what's going on in our country, in our religious systems, in this world. You know, there's a light side to every darkness, and there's a dark side to every lightness. And it's the very evil of fundamentalism that is goading us into new ways of thinking about who we are and what we are to do. We're being stretched. And if we fight the bad with the better, not with the same tool, we're stretched into finding a new path, a new way. And this is where hope is born, and that's what this talk today is about. That's why I wanted to talk to you today about what you stayed up all night last night wondering about, the book of Job. As you know, if you've heard me more than 3 times, I think that one of the things that afflicts us is that we suffer from biblical and religious illiteracy. And next week I will say there are people who could not tell you almost anything accurately about the Bible, but who nonetheless get upset if they think you are doing something that's messing with it. If you were to ask most people what is the oldest book in the Bible, more than likely you would be told the answer is Genesis. Because there are 2 reasons for this. One is it's the first book in the Hebrew collection. And the second is that the book of Genesis has a creation stories in it. And the fact is, by the way, in case you don't know this, the book of Genesis has 2 creation stories in the first 8 chapters, and they're both different. I do not know what literalists do with this, but in the first creation story, Adam, which means humankind, is created first. And in the second creation story, Adam is created last. You can't have it both ways. At any rate, scholars are fairly agreed that this portion of Genesis, and Genesis probably has at least 3 different strains of authorship, but this portion of the book of Genesis was not written until around 500 BC. So it is not the oldest book in the Hebrew collection. And the stories in the book of Genesis have the same historical validity as the story of George Washington chopping down the cherry tree and promising never to tell a lie. Even worse, because the way Genesis is misunderstood, the notion is planted in human beings that we were created in a perfect state, then we broke some major rule, got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and sent into a hopeless state until God had a change of heart, and in the most perverse bit of theology ever created, sent his son to die on the cross so that people could believe in him and go to heaven when they die. Now the danger of this is twofold. First, it is the belief deeply ingrained into almost everybody sitting in this room that we are born no damn good. Now that's a blunt way to put it, but that is called the doctrine of original sin. You were born in sin, you're no good, there's nothing really you can do about it, but you better try. And second, and this is insidious, and it's not immediately apparent until you step back and look at it, but the second thing is that this understanding of creation implies that God was AOL until Jesus came on the scene. All right, so creation was 13.8 billion years ago. The earth created 4.5 billion years ago. Jesus 2,000 years ago, which leaves God a lot of time to sit around working crossword puzzles until God finally says, he says, always he, God, in this scenario, he finally says, you know what, I better go down there and do something. There is no telling how much damage these two misconceptions have done to us individually and collectively over the century. Now, the whole story of creation is far more complicated than it sounds. The creation stories say that we were created in the image and likeness of God, so our understanding of God is critically important to our understanding of ourselves. We're going to talk about that next week. How was it that as the idea of God evolved, we got the sky god who is mean, mostly absent, and vindictive. How we begin is how we end. It's how we go about living our lives. So hang on to that. We're going to return to that next week. So one of the things that Christian fundamentalists claim is that they take the Bible literally. And it's always interesting to me to see when literalists stop taking the Bible literally. I could not tell you how many jokes there are, how many cartoons I have of people standing at the pearly gates waiting to get in. And did it ever occur to you to think that heaven is a gated community? So here's one. A fundamentalist, a Bible-believing, Bible-knowledgeable person ends up there only to be greeted by Jesus. And he is being given a test. And they get, it's proceeding nicely, and Jesus says, okay, great, on to question number 2. Based on biblical teaching, do you accept the following as fact? Talking snakes. Yes, Genesis 3:1. Talking donkeys. Yes, Numbers 22:28. Gods that impregnate humans. Of course, talking donkeys. Yes, Numbers 23:22. Dragons. For sure, Deuteronomy, Job, Psalms, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Malachi all speak of dragons. What about suicidal, demon-possessed, cliff-jumping pigs? So it is written in Mark 5:13, so I believe. And finally, did you do as I commanded and sell each and every one of your possessions and give all your money to the poor? Well, wait. Do what? Yeah, Luke 14:26-32, Luke 18:18-22. I said it twice for Pete's sake. You have to sell everything you own in order to inherit eternal life. Seriously, I thought that was metaphorical. So to take the Bible literally is to abuse it. As I said, Genesis is not the oldest writing in the collection called the Bible. That distinction belongs to the book of Job. Now, there are portions in the book of Ecclesiastes that are probably older than what you find in Job, but the oldest continuous narrative we have in Hebrew Scripture comes from the book of Job. And even people who have little or no experience with the Bible know about Job or know the story of Job or know some of the lines that come from Job, having the patience of Job, all that sort of stuff. So the book of Job raises a question that is fundamental to human existence. And the question has to do with suffering and the absence of basic fairness and justice in the world. Now, anyone who is a follower of Carl Jung is aware of what is maybe Carl Jung's greatest work, greatest writing. And it's Jung's book called The Answer to Job. Trying to understand why there is evil and suffering in this world, especially if God is loving and compassionate, has been part of the human struggle from the very beginning. Some version of what is undertaken in the book of Job exists in every religion that I am aware of. Now, this is a story. It's not factually true. It is truer than that. Everybody in this room gets a shot at being Job. If you've not already had it, just wait. It will come. You're going to have a chance to suffer. Not everyone uses suffering well. Suffering is hard. That's why it's called suffering, meaning under a burden. Under an unbearable, almost, burden. Some people, when they are called into suffering, move into anger, bitterness, meaningless because of their suffering. Some use it to move into the heart of the sacred. So because I believe that religious, biblical, spiritual literacy are important, I want to offer you my take on Job. See where we go. You may or may not know that Satan is introduced to us in the book of Job. And Satan is not a bad guy in the book of Job. Satan and God are buddies. They're drinking pals. And they're talking at the pub one day, having a beer. This is my imagination. You won't find this in the Bible. And God said to Satan, hey, how about my buddy Job down there? He's such a faithful adherent of mine. And Job says, well, no wonder. Satan says, no wonder he's such a faithful person. Look how good he's got it. He's doing well in life. He's got wealth, a large, healthy family. Why shouldn't he be faithful to you? The system of reward and punishment worked for Job. Now, that system of reward and punishment is foundational to this culture. Though there may be exceptions to this fact, and again, this is part of our inherited DNA. By and large, we believe that if someone does well in life, they deserve it. And if something tragic befalls us, almost the automatic response is, what did I do to deserve this? I grew up being taught that people of color could better themselves if they only wanted to, while at the same time opportunities to better themselves were systematically denied them. Now, as an aside, I'm in the process of reading another book that I highly recommend to you in terms of raising awareness about this matter. It is a book called Tears We Cannot Stop, a sermon to white America. I think it is so relevant for the time in which we live. I want you to be forewarned. I'm only able to read this book in small blocks because it's so painful. But regarding the issue of what the book of Job is about, fairness and justice in the context of our culture, it is a critically important work as being incredibly relevant for us trying to figure out how we go forward in this gap to create a culture that really works for everybody. At any rate, God defends Job's faithfulness. And Satan persists, and God says, okay, I tell you what, I will let you test my servant Job for a season. So, Satan removes all the blessings from Job's life. Tragedy after tragedy fall upon Job. He loses his crops, his flocks die off, his wealth is destroyed, his sons and daughters are killed, his health is taken away from him. Now, the religion that Job had been taught was God rewards those who are good and punishes those who are evil. And Job is stuck thinking, since I am a righteous man, which is most all of us believe about ourselves, why has this befallen me? And so here come the comforters of Job. These are, this is a sketch from Blake's wonderful book on Job, the so-called comforters of Job. And they drone on for 30 chapters in the book of Job about how Job must be mistaken. He must have done something, otherwise he wouldn't be suffering so. So Job, come clean about your lack of righteousness. They even quote scripture to back up. Now this lets you know that this is a redacted document, meaning somebody went back and edited it later, right? Okay. Their point is that it would be heresy for Job to hang on to the claim that he's a righteous person in spite of all, in light of all his suffering. He must have done something to deserve this. That was the theology of the time, and it still is. Right? This is what the prosperity gospel is all about. I read an article this week in Sojourners that is very fascinating to me, mentioning all these televangelists who make millions of dollars, Pray Flow Dollar, and all these people who have millions of dollars, and how the people who follow them love that. They're not jealous of it, not envious of it, because it's a foretaste of what they will get if they also play the game. So I want to be clear here that you get this. The theology in Job and the theology of much of our culture is that how we behave or believe controls how God acts. We're in charge. And Jesus came along to say, no, you're not in charge. But we'll leave that. Now this is very fundamentalist theology. Be good, be rewarded. And being good means believe the right things, belong to the right group, etc., etc. So Job's so-called friends are convinced that he must be guilty of something, and they come to help him come to grips with whatever it is so that he can beg for forgiveness and come to an end of his misfortune. But Job wouldn't budge. The theology of his day didn't fit his personal experience, and he was going to let his personal experience be his authority, not what he had been taught. So in the most dramatic point in the story, and this is Leon Benet's wonderful painting of Job, Job is pictured as sitting on a garbage heap, scratching the infected sores of his body with a piece of broken pottery. And all he has left is his inner sense of integrity. Where are you from? What do you do? What was at stake in the story of Job was the meaning of life itself, and it was only by admitting that he was guilty of something which he did not believe that he could avoid the fear that there was not a God or that there was not a God in control. So the theological wisdom of the day was God rewards the just and punishes the unjust. That's not true, said Job. So Job would not relent. He was willing to run the risk of stepping out of the accepted theological truth of his day and go for something new. The book of Job, therefore, ends with a new understanding of God. This new understanding says that every attempt to state how God works is inadequate. Anticipating, in a way, the insights of modern physics, this story says your human mind cannot embrace the reality of God. To conclude that God's ways are our ways always is a fatal theological assumption. As Shelby Spong has in one of his books about the need for a new theological understanding for a new world, quote, Job resisted the theological conclusions of his day. He refused to let his experience be interpreted by the categories of the past. He held on until the birth of a new consciousness embraced him. Job is thus an icon through which we can see the meaning of a profound religious paradigm shift. And that's what we are going for in this gap between the no longer and the not yet. So what's going on in our culture? Our expanded knowledge in the worlds of physics and psychology are telling us clearly that the answers of yesterday are inadequate to the questions that lead to tomorrow. And the defenders of the way things used to be, or the way they thought things were, they're frightened, they're anxious. Frightened people do frightening things. Angry people do angry things. Now, I know, as I said at the beginning of this theme in January, that we always live between what was and is yet to be, the last breath and the next breath. Up until right now, there have been two really major competing stories about what is. We have had the story that's been told to us by religion, and we've had the story that's been told to us by science, and they've been incompatible up till now. And what we get a chance to be, because science is telling us a new story, is part of what some folks are calling a new cosmology. And I understand what that phrase means, but I want to be clear with you that the new cosmology is not new at all. What is new is our awareness of what has always been true. Ironically, what the scientists and the physicists are telling us is what the mystics in all traditions have always said. And that is that we all come from the same place. We are all interconnected. Now, we can embrace this or not. Whether we do or not doesn't change the reality of it. The discoveries of Galileo and Copernicus did not change anything. They just recognized what was already true. If something is true, it's true all the time, everywhere, whether people embrace it as the truth or not. And it is in this new cosmology that we are to find the answers of where are you from and what do you do? What is your identity? What is your purpose? We have a choice about how we answer those questions. Do we embrace the practice of kindness and compassion? Or do we embrace the narrow confines of what we think is doctrinal and ecclesiastical correctness? I believe that if we could embrace our connectedness with everyone who is all that is, the kindness would take care of itself. you don't hurt somebody who is part of your family. So I'm going to go as far as to say that the inherited view of God that most of us got is not working anymore. The God view we inherited is of a usually male God who's separated from this world, who stands back and judges humanity's faults and failings, rewarding the just, punishing the unjust. And this view doesn't work anymore. And it is this very view that perpetuates the notion that we're separate from each other and that we should, in our dealing with each other, be like God is, we think, in our dealing with us. Punishing. Separate. Judgmental. And this view keeps alive the notion that there's something wrong with us. So if the God view we inherited no longer works, what does? Okay. So I just pick up a question that somebody got to me last week. So you say over and over that there's no God in the sky. Are you saying that there's no God? Well, there's no God like there is this stick. God doesn't exist like this stick exists. God does not exist like this podium exists or this bowl exists. No, there is no such God. There is no external designer. There is no micromanager. Folks, the sacred mystery we call God is so much better than that. This doesn't mean that the world is devoid of the sacred. Quite the contrary. The sacred is so intimately present in all that is and all who are that everything, everyone can be regarded as an expression of God. Creative, expansive, entangled, evolving, as self-realizing, self-sharing. We need a new theology for the not yet. And I'm suggesting it looks something like what I just said. It's a theology where God is very present in all the created order. And of course, God is already present. What's missing is our awareness of this. What we need in the not yet are beliefs and practices that don't render God absent from any person, any place, anything. Beliefs and practices that see everyone and everything as sacred. This is very Jesus. Now, we folks who want to see psycho-spiritual growth as central to human living and who also want to follow Jesus and to allow this to affect our religious life, I think we have some very serious, large questions to ask and to answer. Can what goes on in the education program of Christian churches easily interact with the insights that we're learning from the fields of science? Can it embrace the latest biblical scholarship? Can the creeds we write and recite also reflect reality rather than a stubborn clinging to nostalgia and the way things have always been? Can Christian churches fully affirm human oneness and include everyone completely, while at the same time embracing the reality of radical human diversity? Can the faith we are striving for create an institution that brings into being a truth-seeking, truly welcoming community of human beings? Now, we're not there yet. But we better get there or we're going to fall into the gap, not just make it across. Okay, here we go. Again. I love the spiritual exercise of trying to put the non-dual mind into words. It cannot be done, but that does not stop me. I have CDO. It's like OCD, but the letters are in the right alphabetical order. I'm stubborn. You know, the Hindus and the Buddhists are they're better at this than we are. As a matter of fact, if you look at the writings of, say, Thomas Merton or Jim Finley, or Joan Chittister, or Elia Delio, you will see that where they get some of their most important lessons in recent times have been from Buddhism. From Hinduism. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So I'm going to try. Everything that is and all who are an expression of one sacred mystery besides whom nothing exists. This sacred mystery is without beginning. It is unborn. It will always be. It transcends all human limits, measures, and comparisons. And perhaps in the Christian tradition, the person who came closest to capturing this was St. Bonaventure, who said, by God's power, presence, and essence, God is the one whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. Meditate on that. It means you don't have to go anywhere to get to God. God is never absent from us. We, however, are frequently absent from God. You follow that? Because it's going to get deep now. Okay? How do you awaken to the truth of what I just said? That sounds like a very easy, simple question. How do you come into the presence of sacred mystery? And the answer is you can't, because you're already there. We frequently make this error. We pray to a God who's out there. God is absent from me. I pray to God, but I don't have access to God. If all that there is sacred mystery, then the moment we make a distinction between it or being away from it, we have already committed an error. If all there is sacred mystery, then even that which you imagine to be other than sacred mystery is also sacred mystery. Follow that? If all there is sacred mystery, then what you imagine to be other than sacred mystery is also sacred mystery. If all there is this sacred mystery, then there is no escaping sacred mystery, and therefore there is no need to do anything regarding it. What are you trying to do, these people, Bill? Here's what I'm trying to do, is to undermine your thinking about God. You won't get to God by thinking. Only when we can see through the thoughts and words that express these thoughts can we be at last free from them and free to use them without falling into the trap. Let me say that again. Only when we can see through the thoughts and the words that express these thoughts can we be free from them and then be free to use them without falling into the trap. You understand that? I hope not. But I do hope that it opens the door a little bit wider to who you are, where you came from, where you reside right this minute, and because of that. By the way, what did Jesus say about God? God is love? Okay. Because that's where you live right now. That is your identity, your source. That informs how we are to live. So where are you from? And what do you do? No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this, you carry precious cargo, so I will see you here next week. Thank you.